Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can take a look at the mental health and personality characteristics of Nichol Kessinger. Nichol Kessinger was the mistress of Chris Watts. Other questions I get related to this would be how common are these types of affairs, what usually ends up happening, and what are some of the dynamics at work in these types of relationships. So an important note here, Nichol Kessinger and Chris Watts are both real people, so I'm not diagnosing anybody here, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. So I have covered the Chris Watts case in many videos before this. Very briefly, August 2018, we see that Chris Watts kills his pregnant wife and 2 daughters, and after this it was discovered he was having an affair with a woman named Nichol Kessinger. And again, that's what the main question was about here today. So there's a lot of interest in this case for a number of reasons. The shocking nature of the heinous murders, of course. But another reason I've heard lately is that people are worried that the same thing could happen to them, or something similar. The reality is that a lot of people at any given time are involved in affairs. They're incredibly common. So of course these people don't want to be the victim of violence, but they also don't want to contribute to somebody else being violent. So that's again one of the fears I see related to a case like this. So I will talk about some of the information in this case that can perhaps give some insight into what somebody in Nichol Kessinger's position might have been thinking. And then I'll talk in more general terms about this specific phenomenon of women having affairs with married men, specifically with men who not only have a wife but also have children. I've seen this a number of times in my clinical experience. Of course, this is only one type of affair, but I'm trying to keep this related to the circumstances we see in this case. So first, talking about Nichol Kessinger, what somebody in her situation may have been thinking. So several weeks before the murders, Nichol Kessinger and Chris Watts begin a passionate romantic relationship that involves a lot of physical intimacy and contact, perhaps more and different types of intimacy than either had experienced in some time or maybe even experienced ever. We see them spending a lot of time together, taking a lot of photographs of all different types, perhaps making some plans to be together in the future, like we see that Nichol Kessinger searched marrying your mistress, and she also searched the term wedding dresses. So some planning was definitely going on there, or at least some thinking about the future was going on. We see that after Chris Watts' family is reported missing, Nichol goes to the police. She admits there was a relationship, but minimizes her feelings for Chris. She claims she didn't know much about the family. She didn't know that his wife was pregnant. Evidently, she deleted text messages between her and Chris, saying that she was disgusted, so she had to remove all the reminders of him. So it doesn't appear that she was completely honest, at least not at first. So what are the mental health and personality characteristics of someone in this situation? Well, this of course is based only on the evidence that's available, which leaves a lot to be desired. But here's what the evidence we have available kind of points to. I don't really see much evidence of psychopathy. We see a little bit of risk-taking and certainly some irresponsible behavior, but nothing like full-blown factor 1 or factor 2 psychopathy. There's a little bit of narcissism, some self-centeredness, and certainly the pursuit of a fantasy. We see that Nichol Kessinger searches about Amber Frye's book deal. Amber Frye was the mistress of Scott Peterson. Scott Peterson, of course, was convicted of killing his pregnant wife, Lacey Peterson. So again, that seems somewhat narcissistic. We don't really see much going on in terms of borderline pathology. Perhaps there's a fear of being alone or not finding a romantic partner, but nothing that really approaches borderline personality disorder or really borderline traits in any notable way. We see evidence here of immaturity, denial, poor judgment, and being caught up in the excitement of passion. Now, the issue of Nichol Kessinger's personality or culpability in the murders is divisive, to say the least. I know a lot of people strongly dislike Nichol Kessinger, and I realize it's been reported that she's in witness protection, probably because of fears about these people who dislike her. But the behavior that really stands out drastically here is that of Chris Watts. What Nichol Kessinger did certainly is not socially acceptable, not intelligent, again, doesn't indicate good judgment or anything even like that. But what Chris Watts did was really unimaginable. It was unimaginably horrible. Some people are surprised that the police didn't charge Nichol Kessinger with anything. It kind of makes sense that she wasn't charged with the murders, but why wasn't she charged with lying to the police? Well, I think she was probably useful to their investigation. For example, she was on a video call with Chris soon after the murders, and she noticed he was lying on a mattress that had no sheets, and there was some other things like that. Information that would have been helpful to the investigation, and maybe charging her would have made it so she wouldn't cooperate. So regardless of what the police may have overlooked, in order to get some cooperation, I see no evidence that she was involved in the murders. I believe she was just as surprised by these murders as everyone else was. She should have known there was a risk of things turning out badly, to be sure, but no one could foresee what Chris Watts was going to do. Now, comparing what Nichol Kessinger did to what we see in the general public, is her pattern of behavior consistent with women who have affairs with married men? Again, married men with children. As I mentioned, I've seen this many times, and each situation is different, but there are patterns that tend to emerge. First, there's this initial attraction, some fantasizing, usually quite a bit of fantasizing. Then we see this kind of intense physical phase. This often involves behavior that the man would like to engage in more regularly, or something more novel, and of course the woman could be in the same position. In terms of the man, typically he does not have the opportunity inside of his marriage to get involved in these types of behaviors, right? So that's one of the things that kind of draws the man into the situation. So we see this kind of high from all this physical intimacy and this passion. Then we see this kind of despondent, anxious phase where both people worry about whether the relationship will really work. For the person who is single, in this case I'm talking about a woman who's single, the calculations are fairly straightforward. The man should leave his wife, and the two should be together. For the married man, there are more relational and financial components to consider. He probably loves his wife and kids, even if the relationships are not perfect. He doesn't want to lose them. He doesn't want to strain other relationships that he's made because of that marriage, like the relationships with the in-laws. And sometimes he's intimate with both his wife and the mistress, and he doesn't want to give either one up. Then eventually, and this can be a long way down the road, we see some sort of ultimatum. Typically, the first time we see this, it's really not an ultimatum, it's just an empty threat. But eventually, most women in this position will demand that the married man get a divorce or at least separate from his wife. After this, we see what happens most of the time is the man doesn't, and the affair ends. Sometimes the marriage survives this, sometimes it doesn't. Every now and then we see that he leaves his wife and starts a new relationship with the mistress, and this typically ends badly. It typically ends with that relationship terminating. From a clinical point of view, what I see that often confuses counselors who have a client like this is the fact that the woman who is having the relationship with the married man often has a number of other potential partners. The married man isn't the only one that she could date or have some type of relationship with. But once that fantasy stage takes hold, the people kind of fixate on one another, and it's very hard to break them apart. So what about the concerns that some people have that the type of situation that happened with Chris Watts could happen to them? Well, I have a few ideas here, right? Really just 3 ideas. The first one, and this may seem a little bit simplistic, is to avoid affairs. Interestingly, much of the time when I provide this advice, this is not an option for people. It just really speaks again to how powerful these relationships are. So this moves me to my second thought. If somehow the affair is simply unavoidable, and again, I don't know really how it could be unavoidable, but either way, I would say that somebody should seek counseling. As odd as that may sound, at least it would offer the perspective of somebody who's not emotionally involved in the situation. Now moving on to the third and final item here. Realize that statistically speaking, the events we see that were caused by Chris Watts, these heinous murders, these type of murders are exceedingly rare. And they involve a number of factors coming together, a confluence of all these factors, not simply the presence of an affair. Usually, that's not all it takes. There are a number of characteristics typically related to psychopathy and narcissism that are all involved. So those are some of my thoughts related to the situation that Nichol Kessinger was in. I know that whenever I talk about topics like the Watts family murders, there are always going to be a variety of opinions. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate really interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found this description of the dynamics of infidelity to be interesting. Thanks for watching.